Today, notorious prisoner Charles Bronson will appear before a public parole board as he attempts to win his freedom. Despite being incarcerated for over 40 years, he's been married 3 times and has fathered 2 children.
Well, one of his sons, George Bambi, recently released a 2-part documentary about his dad and gave the public a never-seen-before look inside his dad's life, including his relationship with his family. Let's take a look.
And you and Michael are my world. I love you both the same. Different mums, same dad.
Yeah.
In 1975, my wife Irene come to visit me in Hull prison, and I just had one of the biggest beatings I've ever had in my life, and I deserved it. I attacked 3 prison officers, and one of them was an infamous jailer at that time. He used to give a lot out, you know. And I've smashed his head in with a stick. And when I went on the visit, my Irene said to me that day, the way you're going, you will never get out, and you'll end up in an asylum.
Well, watching all that, listening to that and watching him, watching his dad, George Bambi, in the studio now. George, what's your relationship with your dad like?
Yeah, I have a very good relationship with Charlie. You know, we've had a good relationship for 6 or 7 years, and obviously since I first started visiting him and finding out he was my father, I've got to know him very well, like as a friend more than anything else. And obviously as a result of that attachment with Charlie, I've been campaigning to try and get him released and try and get his story out there to the world's media.
What is his story? You know, a lot of people may be saying, have you got nothing else better to do than to be pleading to get this guy out of prison? And then the truth is, they don't really know why he's in prison.
I know it's all like a really complicated situation, but the thing is, Charlie's been in prison for 48 years now, and he's never had his voice. I mean, in the past, there's prisoners like Des Nielsen and other high-profile prisoners where the Ministry of Justice have allowed the media to go in and interview these people and speak to them and talk to them about whatever. They've always denied that access to Charlie, so Charlie's never been able to have his word or have his say. So this documentary that I did with Channel 4, I was working on it for over 3 years. Unfortunately, I was able to video him. Obviously, I can't video him covertly inside the prison because it's a minimum 2-year prison sentence. But when COVID came along, they did a thing called Purple Visits. And when you do Purple Visits, I have my big laptop at home. They feed him in from the prison and we talk. And I had Channel 4 filming the whole thing. So it was an opportunity for him to talk.
And we'll be able to see him talk in this parole hearing, only the second time that's happened in history that this kind of thing's been publicised. I mean, do you, just in the time that you've known him, have you seen a change in him? Because he's been denied parole so many times before because of this worry that he's extremely violent, and there are psychiatric reports and all of that feeding into it. Do you think he stands a good chance today? And would you like to see him released?
Do you know what? I'm really pleased you've asked that question, because people don't ask me questions that I want to be asked. And it's really refreshing. When I started seeing Charlie 7 years ago, he was in trouble all the time, he was violent, he wasn't speaking, you know, his mind wasn't right and all the rest of it. And during the course of our relationship, I've tried to educate him and help him and work with him to try and achieve the personality and the beliefs he needs to ultimately get him released. This documentary that we did, we had a lot of negative feedback from that, because at the end of the documentary, they said something about, I was worried if he'd come out he was going to stab me with a bread knife. I actually went on to say in the documentary he could stab me with a bread knife, but then I said anybody else in the street could stab me with a bread knife, but the only thing he'd ever stab me with would be a paintbrush, because he's not a violent person, he's an artist, and he's rehabilitated himself for many, many years in the prison service. I mean, when I go to visit him at Wood Hill, I mean, you walk through all the wings and everything, there's music playing, it's like a big, massive disco everywhere. And I was talking to one of the prison officers and I said, what's going on here? I said, it's like a youth club. And they said, oh, we only have two prison officers on every wing now. If we go in and tell someone to turn the music off, the place will go up, so we just leave them to it.
But if he's not a violent person, why is he still in prison?
Well, he's not a violent prisoner now. He has been violent in the past. He's been really evil. He's been awful, and he's committed some awful crimes. But everybody's got a past, And, you know, Charlie's gone so long now, sort of staying out of trouble and behaving himself and not getting involved in any stupid arguments and stuff. And if people fall out with him, he just walks away, he doesn't say anything anymore. You know, I've had lots of conversations with him about Phil Danielson, the guy that he took hostage, the teacher. And I've been talking to him and I've been saying, look, you know, this guy, you put him through a horrific ordeal. It was absolutely shocking.
You took him hostage in prison?
He took him hostage in HMP Hull many years ago. And I mean, this poor guy's had psychological problems, etc. And it's awful what's happened. And in the documentary that I made, I was responsible for the documentary, and Phil Danielson took part in that programme, and he expressed how it had affected his life, which was awful. But he also said at the end, Charlie's done 23 years now for what he did to me, and I think it's long enough. And if he was released, I shouldn't have any grounds for objection. And I mean, that's really good coming from his victim, because obviously that's the index case that he's been locked up for.
And how old is Dad?
70 years old. He didn't want to come out and have a fight with anyone or cause any violence. He's an artist. He's an old man.
Yeah, but George, there will be people watching and listening to this, forgive me, there will be, who will just say, you know, lock him up and throw away the key. They won't want to see him out on the streets. We've heard Dominic Raab saying that he is opposed to his release. And yet we've got cases like the murder of Joanna Brown, which has been in the news in the last week. She was attacked by her husband, murdered with a claw hammer.
Yeah.
And her murderer is being considered for parole. And there's a lot of people, again, you, I'm sure, would agree, there seems to be this kind of mismatch.
Yeah, there is. And that's another very good point, because the way that I see it and the way a lot of people, I mean, you know what it's like on social media. I mean, I've had people the last 3 days trolling me, saying they're going to kill me, kidnap me, do all sorts of stuff. I just laugh it off. Now, as far as people like that go, what you need to remember is, and what the public needs to remember, and what these trolls on the internet need to remember, this documentary that we did had no adverse effect on my dad's parole hearing. Because at the end of the day, when it comes to parole, there's 3 people that sit there and they don't look at newspaper articles, they don't look at TV programmes, they look at all the evidence in front of them. And every month for the last 4 years, I've been going into the top security maximum prisons and sitting there having management meetings with Charlie's psychologists, his welfare officers, the probation service, the governors, and we've all sat there, 12 of us in a room every month, and we've discussed everything. And, you know, there was a case where Charlie was considered a very high risk to causing harm to another prisoner. So I challenged this, and they said they were going to downgrade it to medium, to high risk, because he hadn't hurt a prisoner for so long. So then we went to the next meeting and they said, oh, the probation's come back and said, the prison officers, Ministry of Justice, have come back and said, we can't downgrade him to high risk. And I said, why not? And they said, well, his parole's coming up. If he kicks off in his parole, he could attack someone. So I said, well, hold on a minute. Yeah. You can't punish him before the parole. Yeah. And that's what they've done. They've punished him all the time for stuff that he hasn't done. So anyway, I actually got it reversed and now he has been downgraded to minimum risk.
So come today, how can you tune into that when they say it's public? How do you...
No,
must be a via a website or something.
I think there's a live stream somewhere.
Yeah, live stream. What are his chances?
Well, the legal team that he's got is the team that I put together for him, and it was me that got the public parole for him, and I've worked tirelessly for years and years. Me and Charlie aren't talking at the minute, because after the documentary at the end, it portrayed me as... I was thinking my father was going to come out and be violent. That was completely not the case. It misrepresented me, and the way that it was edited was disgusting at the end, but it is what it is. But speaking to the legal team and speaking to everybody else, they reckon 6 years ago, it was 1% chance of getting out, 99% chance of staying in. As of today, they reckon it's a 60% chance of him getting out and a 40% chance of him being turned down.
And that could be today. He could walk out of the doors of...
He won't walk out the prison. He won't walk out the prison today. The system is the parole hearing will take place over a course of 3 days, which is quite unusual. Parole hearings usually last 2.5 hours. But we're talking about Charles Bronson. There's a lot of evidence for them to consider. So... when the parole hearing's finished, the parole board have 14 days by law. They have to write to Charlie in writing and give him the decision of the parole. And if that's favourable and it says he can be released, then it will probably take 6 weeks, 8 weeks while they sort out, obviously, a hostel or where he's going to settle and all the rest of it.
Goodness me, at 70, you know, it'd be a whole new life for him if it was to happen. George, thank you very much indeed. Why does he keep changing his name?
I've got no idea, but I mean, Charles Bronson's a stigma that stuck with him for ages. He's changed his name to Charles Salvador after the artist Salvador Dali.
Yeah.
But regardless, it doesn't matter. Every time you see something in the paper, it's always Charles Bronson.
Yeah,
So might as well change his... If he could change his name to Houdini, it'd be good, wouldn't he? Be able to escape.
George Bambi, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for having me on.
We'll find out, so maybe almost a two-thirds chance that Charles Bronson could be released today after 50 years in prison.
That's right, yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you.